Last week, I made a great video looking at the best signing every year since 1995. Those are not my words, ladies and gentlemen, but the words of Ian Hart. In response to that video, a number of you asked me to turn it on its head and take a look at some of the worst signings of the last 25 years. Now, this was much more difficult to research than the best signings video, which was no walk in the park itself, since only a handful of seriously dreadful big money signings tend to live long in the memory. Just as last time out, the factors were cost, contribution, talent, and sell-on value, so too are they today, although obviously in reverse. Also, just like last time out, there is a quarter of a century to get through, so forgive me for being terse with most transfers, and particularly with regards to dishonourable mentions. Given the challenges in researching this video, I don't doubt that I've missed one or two terrible signings, particularly in the early years, so if you think I have, feel free to let me know about it in the comments section below. Of course, it's also possible that I don't think the signing is quite as bad as most, which will often be because the team actually recouped most of the money they spent on a player, or all of the money, such as Chelsea's signing of Mattia Kesman. Just before I start, have you subscribed yet? If not, then you probably should, because occasionally I make the odd decent video, usually about a dictator or a player who played 300 years ago, and you don't want to miss out when one of those comes out. Without further ado then, here are some of the very worst transfers from throughout world football every year since 1995. 1995. Thomas Brolin. Getting us off to a fantastic start, Thomas Brolin famously struggled to stay fit following his 1995 transfer to Leeds United. A starman for both Parma and Sweden prior to his arrival in the Premier League, Brolin won the Euro 1992 Golden Boot, he made the 1994 World Cup team of the tournament, and he even came fourth in 1994 Ballon d'Or voting, ahead of the likes of Franco Baresi and Michael Laudrup. He set Leeds back a whopping £4.5 million and arrived on a hefty wage, but the transfer ended in disaster. Brolin only played 17 games in 2 seasons at Ellen Road and later had an equally underwhelming spell at Crystal Palace. A dishonourable mention goes to Andrea Silenzi, another Serie A to Premier League switch, who joined Nottingham Forest that same season for £1.8 million and looked utterly useless at the City ground. 1996. Nikola Zhirkin. During the year in which the world's finest football YouTuber was born, perhaps the worst piece of transfer business involved Croatian defender Nikola Zhirkin. Having been stung on Silenzi in 1995, Nottingham Forest weren't content on the terrible transfer front just yet, doubling down and bringing in Real Oviedo star Nikola Zhirkin to the club. The Yugoslavia international set Forest back £1 million, but he registered just 14 appearances during his 3 seasons contracted to the trees. Often ranked as one of the worst Premier League players of all time, Forest were relegated in Zhirkin's debut campaign. He spent the second season out on loan, and he didn't register a single appearance during the third. 1997. Itzik Zohar. A man who is famed in Israel for his free kick expertise, although apparently not famed enough for Getty Images to have more than 3 images of him, Itzik Zohar spent almost his entire career playing in his native Israel. The exceptions were a season with Royal Antwerp and a single season with Crystal Palace. Zohar arrived at Selhurst Park in 1997 for the not insignificant fee at that time of £1.2 million, but the Israeli number 10 registered just 6 appearances in South London. His most memorable moment was a tamely hit missed penalty against Southampton, and he departed after 12 months on a free. 1998. Denilson. An enormous step up in the financial stakes, Denilson's move to Real Betis in 1998 actually made him the most expensive footballer of all time at that time. Exceeding the amount Inter Milan had paid for his compatriot Ronaldo a year earlier, Denilson failed to have the same impact following his transfer as the 2-time Ballon d'Or winner. Betis paid Sao Paulo €31 million, which was roughly £21.5 million at the time, to bring Denilson to Spain. But the fleet-footed wide man failed to make a real impact or find any kind of consistency in La Liga as Betis were relegated in 2000. He spent 7 years in Andalusia and departed on a free transfer in a truly terrible piece of transfer business. 1999. Elvir Bajic. Seeing off competition from Alex Ferguson's disastrous attempt to replace Peter Schmeichel with Massimo Taibbi in 1999, the signing of Elvir Bajic by Real Madrid proved to be even worse. An absolute sensation in Turkey and for the Bosnia and Herzegovina national team, Bajic set Real back an incredible €26 million when he arrived from Fenerbahce. No doubt an enormous talent, injuries thwarted Bajic's time in Madrid, as he ruptured both pairs of cruciate ligaments in his left knee, his ACL, and his PCL before he'd even made his debut. In the end, he made just 11 league appearances for Los Blancos over the course of 3 years before departing on a free, meaning he cost the club more than €2 million per league game before one even accounts for his wages. 2000. Winston Bogarde. Lots of football teams caught the Millennium bug in 2000, that is, the bug of making some truly horrendous mistakes in the transfer market. AC Milan was stung with the £11 million signing of Fernando Redondo, who received a career-ending injury shortly after his arrival. Tottenham paid £11 million for Sergei Rebrov, who was a disaster, particularly in his second season at White Hart Lane. Leicester City signed major flop Aid Akinbaye. AC Milan also inexplicably paid €19 million for Jose Mari, and Inter Milan made the mistake of signing Brazilian international Vampeta for a big fee from Corinthians. Seeing off all of those awful signings, however, is former Dutch international Winston Bogarde, despite the fact that he joined Chelsea on a free transfer. Chelsea handed Bogarde a 4-year deal worth a reported £8 million, but none of their managers during that time wanted him at the club. The Blues tried to ship him out, but Bogarde refused a reduction in terms anywhere else, making just 9 appearances and costing the club almost £1 million per appearance. 2001. Gaizka Mendieta. Another year that was ripe with bad transfers. Honourable mentions go to Aston Villa's deal to sign Bosco Balaban, Fulham's upset with Steve Marler, and Arsenal's poaching of supposed fox in the box turned flop on the bench, Francis Jeffers from Everton. None were anywhere near as costly as Gaizka Mendieta though, the talented Spanish playmaker who joined Lazio from Valencia that year for almost €48 million. The deal made Mendieta one of the most expensive players of all time, but the Spaniard struggled in Serie A, and he was later equally disappointing during a 4-year spell with Middlesbrough. 2002. El Hadji Diouf. I was torn between 2 Liverpool signings for 2002, namely Bruno Chiru and El Hadji Diouf. Chiru was supposed to be the new Zidane, but in truth, he wasn't even the new Danny Murphy. Meanwhile, Diouf perfectly extolled the dangers of signing a player off the back of an impressive display at a major international tournament. Diouf cost Liverpool at least £10 million, he fell out with everyone at the club, and he spat more often than a camel. In his second season on Merseyside, Diouf managed to play 33 games without scoring a single goal, and he was sold to Bolton for a significant loss. 2003. Adrian Mutu. Just as 2002 was a competition between 2 Liverpool signings, 2003 is a battle between 2 players signed by Chelsea, namely Adrian Mutu and Juan Sebastian Veron. Both players cost the club around £15 million, did very little at Stamford Bridge, and departed for nothing. On the face of it, Veron was an even worse signing than Mutu, but not when you take the saga that ended up surrounding Mutu into account, one which still drags on over 15 years on from the initial event. Following his move from Fiorentina, Mutu failed a drugs test and had his contract terminated by the club. Chelsea have been locked in legal battles with Mutu ever since, and whilst Mutu has been ordered to pay Chelsea millions of pounds, it's highly unlikely that the club will ever see that money. 2004. Jonathan Woodgate. I was hesitant to include Jonathan Woodgate for 2004 and almost opted for Francis Jeffers' move to Charlton Athletic, but in the end, Woodgate probably was the worst signing. Not nearly as bad as many people make out during his time at Real Madrid, Woodgate's time in the Spanish capital, and his career in general, was blighted by injuries. A surprise £13.4 million arrival at the Bernabeu, Woodgate had a horrible debut, and after briefly regaining form, he suffered repeated injury setbacks. During 3 seasons in Madrid, Woodgate made a grand total of 14 appearances before being sold to Middlesbrough for around a £7 million loss. 2005. Michael Owen. From a Real Madrid signing to a Real Madrid sale, but sticking with injury-prone Northerners and former England internationals, Michael Owen's £16.6 million transfer to Newcastle United in 2005 turned out to be a disaster for the Magpies. The signing appeared to be a real coup at first glance, and the combination of Alan Shearer and Michael Owen had many of the Toon Army licking their lips. Owen remained a real threat when fit, but much of his 4 years at St James's Park were plagued by injuries, and his perceived refusal to help the team in their fight against relegation on the final day of his final season made Owen deeply unpopular among Newcastle fans. He departed on a free transfer just to compound matters further. 2006. Andrei Shevchenko. Despite being among the greatest centre-forwards of a generation at Dynamo Kiev and AC Milan, Andrei Shevchenko was a bit of a car crash at Stamford Bridge. A reckless signing for over £30 million in 2006, when Shevchenko was already close to turning 30, his signing had supposedly been carried out upon the orders of Roman Abramovich rather than the Blues coaching staff. The Ukrainian marksman never clicked in Jose Mourinho's Chelsea side, and he scored just 9 Premier League goals across his 3 years contracted to the club in total, before returning to Dynamo Kiev on a free. 2007. Mido. Seeing off tough competition from Manchester City signing Rolando Bianchi, in a list that has somewhat inevitably become very Premier League heavy, Mido was a really dreadful signing by Middlesbrough in 2007. Brought in from Tottenham for £6 million, despite the fact that he'd only scored 1 Premier League goal the previous season, Borough were backing on Mido returning to his form from the start of the 2005-06 campaign. Well, he didn't. Either injured, overweight, or both throughout most of his time at the Riverside, the Egyptian proved to be a woeful signing by current England boss Gareth Southgate, and when he finally departed for Zamalek, the club didn't receive a penny in return. 2008. Joe. My first choice for 2008 was initially Afonso Alvarez, and a strong case could be made for the Brazilian, but I didn't want to be seen to be picking on Borough. From Ricardo Quaresma and Amauri to Breno Borges and Mancini, there was little to split a number of candidates in 2008, so I just went with the one that led to the greatest financial loss, which was Joe. Signed by Man City from CSKA Moscow in 2008 for a club record fee of between £19 to £22 million, Joe scored 1 goal in 21 Premier League appearances for the Citizens during his 3 years contracted to the club, before leaving on a free. 2009. Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Savio Nazareko very nearly won, or lost, the battle for 2009, but as dreadful as he was for West Ham United, he can't compete with the insane finances involved in Barcelona's deal to sign Zlatan Ibrahimovic. The Swedish marksman cost Barca £59 million in cash, plus the services of Samuel Eto'o, who was among the finest centre-forwards on the planet in his own right at the time. When one factors in the valuation of Eto'o, Ibrahimovic was probably the most expensive signing in world football, and still among the most expensive today. Despite all his talent, Pep Guardiola's decision to move Lionel Messi into a more central role rendered Ibrahimovic surplus to requirements. He made just 46 appearances for the club, scoring 22 goals, before departing for only €24 million. 2010. Jorge Martinez. Signed for more than £10 million by Juventus in 2010, following 3 impressive seasons with Catania, Jorge Andres Martinez had a nightmare 6 seasons in Turin. The wide man was injured on his debut, and that set the tone for most of his time at the club, which was beset by setbacks. He spent his second season on loan with Cesena, where he was injury plagued once again, and eventually relegated. 3 further loan moves followed, and after leaving Juventus on a free transfer, Martinez made just 1 appearance for Juventus before being forced into an early retirement. 2011. Andy Carroll. Honourable or dishonourable mentions go to centre-back Sebastian Scalacci and Roger Johnson for their moves to Arsenal and Wolves respectively in 2011, but neither can trump the madness of Liverpool's £35 million move for Andy Carroll. Having recouped a fantastic £50 million fee for Fernando Torres in January 2011, Liverpool proceeded to spunk 70% of it on a donkey who'd had 1 half-decent season in the Premier League at Newcastle. Okay, that is a tad unfair, since Carroll is a man of many talents who has had a horrible time with injuries and was a majestic aerial presence back in the day. Nonetheless, he was never worth £35 million, or even remotely close to that amount. He flopped at Anfield, and he was eventually sold for £17 million to West Ham United. 2012. Jose Bosingwa. Only the second free transfer to make this list, you have to be really, really bad to be the worst signing of the year, despite not commanding a fee, and Jose Bosingwa was most assuredly really bad at Queen's Park Rangers. The West Londoners went on a spending spree following promotion to the Premier League, recruiting a handful of overpaid has-beens looking for one last big payday. No one encapsulated that lack of interest better than Jose Bosingwa, who was utterly hopeless all season before being seen laughing as he left the pitch during the game in which the club's relegation was confirmed. 2013. Roberto Soldado. There was a lot of excitement at White Hart Lane surrounding the signing of Roberto Soldado, who had scored 81 goals in 141 games in his previous 3 seasons for Valencia. The Spanish international arrived for a £26 million fee, smashing Tottenham's previous record, and he was expected to lead Andre Villas-Boas' line and make an immediate impact. Soldado didn't manage to do either to any great effect, bagging just 16 goals in 76 games and failing to even hit double figures in the Premier League across his 2 seasons in North London. He departed for just £10 million in 2015, a dreadful signing, and a wretched human being, or so I am told. 2014. Jack Rodwell. The Everest or Everest of years for awful transfers, 2014 gave us Mario Balotelli's move to Liverpool, Manchester City signing of Eloquim Mangala, and Jack Rodwell's switch to Sunderland. All 3 were utter disasters, but none proved more damning to the club involved than Rodwell's deal. At the time, Rodwell looked like a good signing by Sunderland, having impressed at Everton, but just failed to get regular first-team football at the Etihad. Pound for pound, he may have ended up being the worst signing of all time. Rodwell cost Sunderland a reported £22.7 million in terms of his transfer fee and wages. He made 76 appearances, Sunderland lost his first 39 starts in the league, and he grew to be despised by the Black Cats faithful. So he sees off Balotelli and Mangala, who were also absolutely awful signings. 2015. Ricky Alvarez. After saying I wouldn't pick on Middlesbrough, I'm afraid I have to pick on Sunderland, with 2 consecutive inclusions for the club from the northeast. Make no mistake, this wasn't a home run. Barcelona signed Arda Turan, and Aston Villa brought in Jolyon Lescott and Mika Richards in 2015, so there was plenty of competition. Those clubs did at least want those players at the time they were signed though. The same cannot be said of Sunderland and Ricky Alvarez. The Argentine originally joined Sunderland on loan from Inter Milan the previous season, but when the Black Cats avoided relegation, it triggered a €10.5 million buyout clause in the loan deal. Sunderland didn't actually want Alvarez, so they tried to scupper the deal in any which way that they could. They pulled out, citing a knee injury, but Inter took the matter to arbitration, which Sunderland lost. In the end, Alvarez ended up costing Sunderland more than £20 million, and he never played a game after his loan move. 2016. Jackson Martinez. Another man who was beset by injuries following a big money move, Jackson Martinez has to go down as one of the worst and most unfortunate signings of the modern era. Initially a flop for Atletico Madrid, where he only scored 3 goals in 22 games, following a €35 million move from Porto, Diego Simeone's side were handed a get-out-of-jail free card when they received a €42 million bid from Guangzhou Evergrande, just 6 months into Martinez's life at the Metropolitano. 2 months into life in China, Martinez suffered an ankle injury, which ruled him out for months. When he returned, the ankle went again, this time ruling him out for 2 years. Guangzhou ended up terminating his contract, losing a player who had cost them €42 million before wages for nothing, with only 16 appearances in return. Dishonourable mentions must go to PSG's signing of Jesse Rodriguez and Arsenal's acquisition of Shkodran Mustafi. 2017. Danny Drinkwater. The footballing equivalent of Eon Productions paying James Corden £500 million to be the next James Bond, the signing of Danny Drinkwater by Chelsea for £35 million is among the worst piece of business anywhere in the world, never mind just in football. There are some transfers in this list that just didn't work out or were spoiled by injuries, but the signing of Danny Drinkwater was baffling at the time and even more laughable with the benefit of hindsight. Having done a good job at Leicester City alongside N'Golo Kante, Chelsea no doubt felt that Drinkwater would accompany the Frenchman well in their midfield, in addition to bumping up their homegrown players quota. It wouldn't have been the worst idea in the world had he been signed for something akin to the £8 million that Man City paid for Fabian Delph. For £35 million, someone wants shooting. During the same transfer window, Wolves signed Ruben Neves for less than £16 million, Mohamed Salah signed for Liverpool for an initial £34 million, and Richarlison joined Watford for £11 million. Chelsea could have re-signed Salah or bought Neves and Richarlison for less than they paid for Drinkwater. A dishonourable mention for Everton's signing of Gylfi Sigurdsson from Swansea City for a stupid amount of money, in what has proved to be a dreadful addition for the price involved. 2018. Kepa Arrizabalaga. Yet again, 2018 is a hell of a year for rubbish transfers. You've got Alexis Sanchez to Manchester United, Thomas Lemar to Atletico Madrid, and Philippe Coutinho to Barcelona. All are pipped by the signing of Kepa Arrizabalaga for over £71 million though, in what now looks like the most rash piece of business that Chelsea have ever conducted. And believe me, there's a fair bit of competition. Brought in as a replacement for Thibaut Courtois, the FIFA Kepa raised one or two eyebrows, and he caused controversy during his debut campaign by refusing to be substituted in the EFL Cup final. He did at least do a semi-competent job in the 2018-19 season though. The same cannot be said for his form in 2019-20, in which Kepa was an accident waiting to happen, normally not waiting very long, and was frequently dropped in favour of an Argentine who is 83 years old. It'll be a miracle if Chelsea manage to recoup even half of what they paid for the Spaniard. 2019. Eden Hazard. There's almost nothing to split four candidates for 2019, namely Nicolas Pepe, Antoine Griezmann, Eden Hazard, and Luka Jovic. Cases could be made for all four, but I left out Pepe and Jovic since they're still young, they could come good, and they may still hold decent resale value. Hazard and Griezmann are very similar in many respects, both outstanding footballers who were brilliant for their former clubs but were signed for stupid amounts of money by La Liga giants before enduring underwhelming, and at times turgid, debut campaigns. For me, Hazard has been even more disappointing than Griezmann and has contributed slightly less, partly due to injuries, so the Belgian edges in for 2019. 2020. Miralem Pjanic. A Barcelona signing may miss out in 2019, but the wretched Bartomeu regime can't avoid inclusion with our final selection. A dishonourable mention may be owed to Donny van de Beek's signing, brought in for a substantial fee, with seemingly zero idea of how to fit him into the team. But as with a few others, he is still young, and will still command a hefty fee should Manchester United look to sell him. The same cannot be said for Miralem Pjanic, who was already 30 years old when he joined Barcelona in the summer for €60 million, plus a further €5 million in potential future add-ons. That's enough money to buy a small country, and whilst the deal also saw Arthur head in the opposite direction for €72 million, the Brazilian does at least have time on his side, aged only 24. Whilst Pjanic is undoubtedly a very talented midfield playmaker, his signing for such an exorbitant fee is just yet more evidence of the short-termism in Catalonia right now, which was also reflected in the ludicrous deals that were struck to sign Antoine Griezmann and Philippe Coutinho. It's early days for Pjanic at the Camp Nou, although he has made a fairly slow start, and even if he manages to click into gear under Ronald Koeman, he'll have to be seriously impressive to ever justify that €60 to €65 million fee. So that is it for today's video, but thank you all as ever for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and do give us a like if that was the case. Also, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, make sure that you are subscribed to HITC Sevens and have notifications turned on, and feel free to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, where the username is just at HITC Sevens on both platforms.